Welcome to The Standard. From Vancouver, I'm Jonathan Roth, filling in for Peter Klein. Tonight on this, the final episode of the program, we will replay a classic interview we did with billionaire Jim Pattison. He's a bit later on. But first, federal Liberal leader Michael Ignatieff. There's probably no Canadian politician in history with the intellectual achievements of Michael Ignatieff. A world-famous author, he held prestigious posts at universities such as Cambridge, Oxford, and Harvard before jumping into politics in 2006. Mr. Ignatieff and I sat down for a candid conversation when he was in Vancouver last week. Mr. Ignatieff, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Nice to be here.
The Standard. My first question, you've been in politics now about 4 years, and very quickly you ascended the ladder. And I just want to read you back a quote that you said to the Globe and Mail a couple of years ago that was dealing with politics. And you told them, you said, "I think I'm up to the job, that is being in politics, but I don't know whether I'm up to the price you have to pay." So why are you in politics today?
Because this is my country, and because I think it's going in the wrong direction. I've always had a certain idea of Canada. Based on equality, based on fairness, based on it. It's quite a traditional Canada. You know, it's a Canada based on equality, based on democracy. I think we got a prime minister who's imported a lot of right-wing, ideological, let me be blunt, nonsense. Mm-hmm. And you can't run this country. You can't govern it well on the basis of ideology. This place is too complex. I was at a meeting this morning. There were 200 people in the room, and there must have been 40 ethnic groups. I'm not kidding. The diversity of this country is staggering. The regional differences in the country are staggering. You have to have someone who's got one idea in mind, which is to bring us together, right? It's that simple. Bring us together. That's what a prime minister is there to do. Mm-hmm. And this guy's pulling us apart. And so that's why that's what I'm here to do.
Now, I understand that, but let's go back a little bit, because when you entered politics, there was a Liberal government in Canada. And I can understand you saying that, you don't like the direction Prime Minister Harper's taking us now. But when you got into politics, Martin was still Prime Minister. And, depending on which way the winds blew, there was potential there of the Liberals being in power for a long time. I guess the question is, for you, coming from the world that you came from, you knew the rigors that politics entailed. Why did you take the plunge? Because I understand Jonathan, you don't like the direction the country's going.
I'll be candid with you. Nobody has any idea what you're in for when you go into politics. Yeah. You can anticipate as much as you want, and then they throw you in there, and you got to fight for your life. I fought the first campaign 55 days in the snow, and it was an incredible experience. But we could have lost it. Mm-hmm. And the one thing I learned is you have to earn this. You can't sail in anywhere and say, "Hi, aren't you all glad to see me?" You got to persuade Canadian after Canadian, vote by vote, mm-hmm. that you're worthy of their trust, because it all comes down to trust. And I had to learn that, and you have to learn that the hard way. But no one can tell you before you get into it what it's like when you're in there. It's mm-hmm. It's a different. You go the other side of the mirror, and it's a great experience, but you can't anticipate what it's like until you've done it.
Right. Now, here's what I'm getting at, because and I think this is part of the reason why you're doing a bus tour across Canada now, that the Conservatives have done what they tend to do a lot of these days mm-hmm. With their attack ads. They've said you're just visiting, you're only here for a while, and you're going to head back to the States or the UK or whatever if politics doesn't work out. I guess, first of all, was that offensive to you? And second of all, how do you overcome that? Because, seeing video quotes of you identifying as an American, as Canadians, we look at that and there's suspicion there.
Yeah, this is politics. They're going to frame you up as best they can. And they tell lies about you, to be blunt. And you have to sit there and hang in there and get Canadians to see you for what you really are.
What's a lie that they're saying now about you?
That I'm just visiting.
Right.
I fought 2 federal elections. Mm-hmm. I've run for the leadership of my party. I'm not passing through. And I've never been anything other than a Canadian. And I get a little stirred up when people challenge my patriotism. I don't challenge their patriotism. I don't see why they should challenge mine. And I'm just starting, you see, because it's not about me. I don't actually care what people say about me. But I do care about the 2 million Canadians who live and work outside of the country at any one time. Some of the people watching this program have sons and daughters living overseas. Are we seriously saying that they're less good Canadians? Are we seriously saying that when they come back home, they're just visiting? You see, it's not about me. I could care less what Stephen Harper says about me.
Right.
But I do have a different view of citizenship than he does, which is let's lighten up here. Let's relax here. Canadians are living and working in every country in the world. And 20% of our country was born in another country. Let's understand that being a Canadian citizen is also being a citizen of the world. Let's welcome that. Let's be excited about that instead of trying to play this game in which you define who's a good Canadian and who's a bad Canadian. That's the kind of stuff Stephen Harper does, and that's not the stuff I do.
Mm-hmm. So what is it about him? Because I think this is the case in a lot of politics, that there's a visceral reaction to political leaders. And the Prime Minister seems to have that where people either love him or they hate him. You deal with him on almost a daily basis. What's that all about, and why do you think you're better suited to be Prime Minister than he is?
Look, I don't get personal with Mr. Harper. Mm-hmm. I think he's taking the country in the wrong direction. But I've just said I don't want to attack his patriotism or his character or his family or this or that. That's not how I think we ought to do politics. He's a tough, determined political leader. But he's a politician 24/7. He gets up, he goes to bed, he thinks, lives, breathes, and eats politics. He's a professional line politician. That's all he's ever done. He's never run anything else other than political parties. I've done a lot of other different things in my life. I've been a journalist, I've been a writer, I've been a teacher, mostly a teacher all my life. And I think that kind of brings something to the story that's useful. I've lived a certain kind of life, and that makes me different from him. And it's not a personal thing, it's just we've lived different lives. What would I do different? It's hard to put it into words except to say, you get up every morning as a Prime Minister and you think, how do we bring the best out of people? How do we bring people together? How do we make sure that this country its unity is maintained? You see, there are a lot of other countries in the world where you can just forget about the unity of our country. You just take it for granted. But we're a continual work in progress. At any given moment, there's a resentment in one region, there's a difference in another region. We speak 2 official languages, we've got every language and culture in the world. We're often very deeply divided by conflicts in other countries like the Middle East or what's happening in Afghanistan and Pakistan and Sri Lanka.
Right.
These things can tear us apart. And a Prime Minister's job is not that complicated. It's to think, how do we keep this show on the road? How do we keep us together? How do we keep us feeling Canadians? How do we keep us feeling united and together and committed to the same project? I mean, we're talking to each other at the PNE grounds. This is the greatest country in the world. There are not many countries in the world where you can have this standard of living, this degree of simple happiness on a Saturday afternoon. And, I'm in politics to make sure we keep that going.
So how do we get beyond, there's this caricature of Canada that I think even Canadians have, and that I think, frankly, the CBC is a big proponent of this, that hockey is the extent of what Canada is. How do we get beyond that, realistically and seriously, to say that Canada is more than just a sport that we all love and enjoy?
Yeah. I think there are a lot of Canadas out there. The Canada that and hockey's part of it. There's no question about that, and we're good at it. We have reason to be proud of it. But I think there's a lot more to Canada. The thing I say, which people find really surprising, is I think the greatest achievement of Canada is political. If you think about this is a country that's held together, at least 5 different regions. It's the second largest democracy in physical size in the world. We got the Arctic, we got the North, we got the South, we got rural, we got urban, and we've made a home for people from every language, race, and color. And we've kept this place peaceful for 150 years. I used to be a war correspondent. I used to go to places where they're killing each other over religion and language and culture. And we've managed not to do that. Why do people care about Canada and the rest of the world? They care because they look at this country and they think, how did you guys do this? And that to me is the Canada, that we've held all this diversity together and made one country out of it. And that's the Canada that I care so passionately about.
All right, well look, we're going to touch on some other things just after the break. After the break, more with Mr. Ignatieff, Afghanistan, a whole bunch of issues. Stay tuned.
Peter Klein's wardrobe for the Standard is provided by Samtani & Son Tailors in Langley. Men's and women's tailoring. Samtani & Son. Fitted for you, fitted right.
Welcome back. A majority of Canadians are against Canada's military mission in Afghanistan, and yet both the Conservatives and Liberals support it. This is where part 2 of my interview with Liberal leader Michael Ignatieff begins. So I want to touch now on Afghanistan, which is an issue that's obviously hot here. It's really hot down in the United States. I want to talk a little bit about what's happening. And what I did was I framed what's happening in Afghanistan in basically I put a price tag on it. This is what Afghanistan has cost Canada to this point. We've been there since 2002. We've lost over 150 soldiers, countless casualties, who knows how many for sure. Coalition forces have lost nearly 2,000 soldiers. It's the longest war in U.S. history, and it will cost Canada nearly $20 billion when it's done. And that's just military costs. Who knows about all the other social costs and everything else that it will cost us. The results, and you might disagree with me on this, we have an Al-Qaeda that is basically non-existent in the country, and yet the war seems to be getting worse. The Taliban's re-energized, and we have President Karzai, who many believe is as corrupt as they come. Why do you support this war?
When you put the question like that, look, I know one thing about Afghanistan, which is that I was there in 1997 when the Taliban took Kabul. I actually was a working journalist, and I saw what happened when the Taliban took Kabul. I saw women, professional women, lawyers, doctors, running through the streets to take shelter in Western aid agencies because the Taliban were coming. I saw the fear that they created. I saw the chaos they created. I saw the freedoms that they crushed. So let's remember where we were 15 years ago. The price has been terribly high. I wouldn't deny any of it, and I think you put it very well. And the only price that really matters a damn is that 151 people that we left behind. I was in a meeting yesterday in Victoria, British Columbia, and a woman came up to me who I recognized because she's the mother of one of the soldiers who didn't come home. And I was talking to her. And that's the person to whom you have to answer the question. You lost your son. What do you honestly tell her? What she feels, and I don't want to put words in her mouth or in the mouths of anybody who lost a son there, is we went there for a reason. We went there to do something very hard, which is to allow a government to take root in Afghanistan that would be better than the government it replaced, that would create security for people, allow girls to go to school, not democracy, not perfection, just better government than the Afghans have had for nearly 500 years. And through all the shot in the shell, Afghanistan is in better shape now than it was in almost any period of its history except the 1960s.
But how is it going to look?
Let me just finish
Sure.
on this. I don't think we can sustain, and nor should we sustain, the combat mission for Canada after 2011. I think we've done our time. We've made our contribution. But when I think about that mother, I come to the conclusion that we can't walk away from Afghanistan as if it never happened. What am I supposed to say to her if I walk away and say it never happened? You left your son there, I'm sorry, we're out of here. I feel that if that's the case, if she's made that sacrifice, then it's appropriate for us to say, okay, end of combat, but how do we help this country go forward? Can we help them train their judiciary to be a little more honest? Can we train their government to be a little less corrupt? Can we train their police force to be a little less rapacious and a little more like our police force? These are things that we can do. I don't want another Canadian soldier to die in Afghanistan. But equally, I don't want to face that woman who lost her son and be able to say, well, that was then and this is now, right?
Right.
That's the real dilemma. That's the real stuff that a political leader has to think about. I have to be able to look her in the eye and say it wasn't in vain. We stayed, we persevered, we did something so that your son did not die in vain. That's the issue here.
I mean, I understand that there are tough moral and political questions, and you have to balance both to come up with some sort of compromise. But realistically speaking, when we leave in 2011, who knows how much longer the Americans are going to stay there? President Obama gave an 18-month window when he sent the troops in, the new surge. How long that's going to last, no one knows. Realistically speaking, is the price really worth it in the end? And I guess what I'm trying to say is, if you had your druthers, would you stay there until the job was done? Because it feels as if we're leaving before the job is done, and there's something morally hazardous about doing that.
Well, but that's what I'm saying. I don't think the job is done. But look, let's be clear. Let's get right down to basics here. This is not our country, right? It's their country. They have to defend it. We could be there for 100 years trying to defend it. But if they won't defend it, if they won't stand up, if the police won't stand up, if the army won't stand up, there's nothing we can do. There's nothing Obama can do. There's nothing the British Prime Minister can do. There's nothing Canadian Prime Minister can do, right? But, so I'm not saying let's be here forever. What you've got to say is, you've got a little more time, not much, 2012, 2013, and then you've got to be able to defend yourself. And to repeat, I am not in favor of committing combat soldiers in Afghanistan after 2011. We've been there for a decade, we've done our time. What I am prepared to consider is, continued diplomatic, continued humanitarian, some training, the kind of stuff that says, okay, get your act together here. Right? It's your country, you've got to defend it. I mean, that seems to be something I can take to the Canadian people and say, that's a reasonable proposition. And then I can take it back to those families who lost their loved ones. And I can say, that's what we're trying to do. But this is not open-ended. To repeat, it's their country, it's not ours.
Sure, I understand. Now, we have like 2 minutes left, and there are a million questions we could ask you about. But the bus tour that you've been on, how's it going? I mean, before you started there, I've seen polls that said a lot of Canadians didn't know who you were. I've seen polls that still say today 3 in 10 Canadians still don't know who you are. But realistically speaking, how has it been?
We've done 26,000 miles. We've just completed our 100th event. We've taken politics out of Ottawa, out of this little bubble of cynicism. We've done old-style politics. Get up on a stump, you pick up the microphone, you talk to Canadians, they're close in. It's been a beautiful summer, so there's sunlight on their faces. And what you see is people have come out to listen. People have come out to talk about the future of their country. It's very old-fashioned. It's very, it's very moving to me. And it's been one of the greatest experiences of my life.
Lastly, you lost someone really close to you here just a few weeks ago. Can you tell us a little bit about Mario and what he meant to you personally? And I guess how his family's doing since, and how the people around you that worked with him are doing.
Thank you for asking the question. Mario was the center of a team. Politics is about teams. It's like a hockey team or a basketball team or something. You play together. You're in the locker room together. You learn about their families. You learn about their wives and children. He was a big, booming presence, large physical presence with an incredible sense of humor, incredible vitality, incredible love of life. He was a Quebecois to the tips of his fingernails. And he was a passionate Canadian. He started the day when he was my communications director, mostly rolling his eyes at all the stupidity in the press and getting me ready for the day. And I got very close to him because of that, because he had a kind of calming, let's not make a drama out of a crisis character. He was very steady, good, safe pair of hands, And he died in a senseless and tragic motorcycle accident. And it was like a body blow to the whole team. And I think everybody who knew him and loved him will regret that moment to the end of their lives.
Well, listen, on that note, as I say, there are a million other things I could ask you, but I appreciate your time today.
That was nice.
And,
nice to talk to you.
Nice to be
Thanks
here.
a lot.
Thank you. Coming up next, a classic interview with billionaire businessman Jim Pattison. Welcome back. Peter Klein had an opportunity to interview billionaire Jim Pattison earlier this season. The conversation covered everything from Mr. Pattison's faith and family to the ups and downs of his business empire.
Thank you very much for joining us. A lot of people consider you the Warren Buffett of certainly British Columbia, if not Canada. People listen when you speak. So I want to ask you about your thoughts about the economy, first of all. When this economic downturn happened last year or so, were you surprised?
Yes, surprised to the degree of the hit. Yeah, absolutely.
What was it about the degree of it? I mean, you expected something was coming?
Well, you know, we've had a long run of good times for a long time, and things go in cycles, so you know that after a long run of good times, you usually get a correction somewhere. But the degree and the hit was something that we didn't anticipate.
Now, you have holdings in Canada and in the U.S., pretty significant in both countries. So probably better than anyone, you've seen the comparison between the two. And a lot of people have said, certainly in the States, that Canada's fared much better. Some have even said Canada's coming out of a recession. The U.S. is far from that. Why do you think the economic downturn has hit the two countries so differently?
Well, I think that there's no question the U.S. has been hit harder than Canada in a significant way. And I think that, you know, we have a lot of good things going for us with Western Canada. You know, we've had a strong oil and gas industry, and our resources are, you know, natural resources are strong. Agriculture's been very good, and a lot of the commodities have done well over quite a long period of time. And our banks have been very solid. The banks have been much better shape, as you know, than the American banks. And that stabilizes a lot of things.
Is that because of different regulations, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think regulations are part of it. Also, I think Canadians tend to be more conservative. And certainly the Canadian banks, as a general proposition, have had good management.
How have you personally been affected by the downturn? Have you lost a lot?
Well, we have lost a lot. We have lost some money initially in the stock market, but you don't lose it till you actually sell it. But having said that, our businesses have been actually doing quite well. We're highly diversified, and the businesses we're in have been acting very well. So we're very grateful for the whole way our company's acted. But certainly, initially, when the stock market got hit, we are in the stock market from time to time in different things. So we felt it, but our underlying business has been very good.
One of your secrets to success seems like it's that you're diversified. You really have you have a really broad range of holdings.
Well, that was our whole basis. Was originally I was a car dealer, and we lived in BC, and the BC was a very cyclical economy because it went the way the forest industry went. And you had good forest years and bad lumber years, and our economy really was up and down. And the car business was also a cyclical business, been tied that with BC, so I decided to strike out and try to not have all our eggs in one basket. And so far, it's worked out okay.
What do you think the average person at home who doesn't have billions of dollars in holdings, what could the average person do to protect themselves and perhaps learn from some of the lessons that you've done?
Well, I think just fundamentally, nothing in the world usually goes straight up. And I think it's always, in the early years when you're trying to buy a house and buy furniture, then you're highly leveraged, if you like. You borrow as much as you can because you're starting your family out and all the things that all the young people do. But as time goes by, you want to try and set a little bit of money aside so you don't spend everything. So when a rainy day does come, it sees you through, because there's usually always a rainy day, I find, and there's always some really very good runs of good times. They go in cycles. I think that history will treat and look at George W. Bush better than they're looking at it now.
Welcome back. Now for part 2 of Peter Klein's exclusive interview with billionaire businessman Jim Pattison.
You have been clearly very involved in politics in Canada, but also in the U.S. You've been quite close with a number of presidents and other politicians. Curious what you think about President Bush. Looking back on it, not a lot of perspective, but a little perspective now. What kind of president was he?
George W. Bush?
Mm-hmm.
Well, he had a lot of tough things hit him. He was a president not very long, few months, I guess, when 9/11 hit, which changed the world. And then he made a judgment call, I guess, to go into Iraq. And that, of course, had such a huge impact on the whole thing. I just really don't know enough about you can't understand why people make decisions unless you have all the facts.
Sure.
And certainly I wasn't in any position to know any of the facts, let alone any significant ones. But I think as time goes by, I think that history will treat and look at George W. Bush better than they're looking at it now. That's my opinion.
I know you've spent quite a bit of time in Israel. You've been a real supporter of Israel. Where, in your opinion, where are things in terms of that country, and what is your interest in Israel? I mean, why are you such a supporter of the country?
Well, we have been a supporter of Israel for 2 or 3 reasons. One of the reasons is that they're a democracy over in the Middle East, and I think as the United States have supported them, and the Western world, I think, have supported democracy, and we're supporters of that. Secondly, that the Jews in Israel are sort of very much involved in the development of Christianity, of which we're supporters. So, and I think that it's an important part of the world to have stability, and so we've supported them.
And I know that a number of folks I know who evangelical Christians support Israel and publicly state that there's a biblical imperative to support Israel to have a homeland for the Jews, since there is that's a significant part of Scripture, and by having a homeland for the Jews, that helps bring forth the second coming. I'm curious what you think about that as a motivation for supporting Israel.
Well, I can't, I'm not a Bible scholar, so I can't really respond to that, except we have always been supporters of Israel as a citizen of a democracy, Canada, and also as a Christian believer that thinks it's a good thing to support Israel.
You say you're not a Bible scholar, but you are a church-going man. I'm sure you've heard those words from Christ that I think what the quote is, it's harder for a camel to get through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. When you hear words like that, though, in church, I'm curious what you think about this as a wealthy man.
I don't do anything different than I did when I was growing up. I live in a house better than the house I was raised in, and but you know, I've never thought of. I do the same things that I did when I was growing up, basically.
If you weren't a Christian, do you think that would have changed your business life?
I don't think so. I mean, I've always kept my business, and we have certain values here that I think most business people have: honesty, integrity. Treat people with respect. Give everybody an equal opportunity, regardless of their religion or their race or their gender. We try to do that, but most people do that. And I think that I just really don't see what most business people are very honest. And there's always somebody that isn't. There's always somebody, whether it's politics or sports or unions or business or people that are church people will disappoint you, or political leaders will disappoint it. And so that's human nature. But, as far as I'm concerned, I think I've tried to keep my business and what I do in my private life personal.
Right. Well, I mean, I know that one of the stories that came out, this is years ago, was there was concern among certain groups that for instance, because you have these magazine distribution holdings, that some of those places distribute pornography, which would go against your personal beliefs. Where do you, I don't know where that stands right now, but where does one draw the line in terms of being a business person and trying to maximize profit and supporting their own personal and religious values?
Well, I think that we obey the law. And I believe that we've fought wars in our country, and my family, some members have died fighting wars, the last couple, to help us have a democracy, free speech, freedom of religion, and all of the things that we believe in. And so our objective is to make sure we obey the law. Right. But for us to impose what we think is right or wrong is really not our business.
As you get older, do you find that faith changing in any way? Increasing, decreasing, modifying?
No, I think the fundamentals are pretty well. I was raised in an environment where we went to church and were taught the Christian principles, and I don't think that fundamentally have I changed my mind about it. I think basically there's some things that I might have different ideas a little bit, but generally the faith that I was taught and raised in, I've stuck with it. I don't think that giving a lot of money to children is necessarily the best thing to do.
Welcome back. Now for the conclusion of Peter Klein's conversation with billionaire businessman Jim Pattison.
Your daughter was tragically kidnapped and thankfully rescued 25 years ago or so. How has your family coped with that tragedy? I mean, have you healed from that scare?
Yeah, that was one. We've had a number of unhappy circumstances because of the world, the way the world works today, like that. But listen, you have to live and move on. You can't change what happened 2 minutes ago. And there's no sense of looking in a rear view mirror. Obviously, once if a dog bites you going down one side of the street and you're delivering the mail, you'll probably go down the other side for a while, and to try to avoid the same dog, to get bit. So I think that we all learn to watch out. But I think that you can't live your life looking in a rearview mirror, other than hopefully I've learned from many of my mistakes. And certainly, and I think we all are in that category where we make mistakes and look back and say, I wish I hadn't done that. And look at it, and sometimes you make the same mistake again, but you sure try hard not to.
I know that you've publicly said that you don't intend to leave your wealth to your children. What's the reasoning for that?
I don't think that giving a lot of money to children is necessarily the best thing to do. I think it's important. Everybody's different. Every family's different. But I think that it's important for children to learn values, to learn to work hard, make their own way in the world. That doesn't mean to say you won't help them. But as far as leaving them vast amounts of money, which today I think it's important that there's a lot of other things that it's important that they have a sense of accomplishment in their life. And I think that after a certain level, that the money probably is better spent trying to help others that are less fortunate.
Well, I guess the $64,000 question, or the $6.4 billion question, is then who will you leave your money to?
But we don't talk about that.
You grew up with an entrepreneurial streak. I mean, I've read all the stories, how you sold seeds and how, when you had newspapers with, was it the bombing of Pearl Harbor, and you bought up a whole bunch of papers and then sold them as mementos. Right. How do you pass on that work ethic and that entrepreneurial spirit to your children?
Well, I don't know whether you can pass it on. All you do is set an example. But everybody's different. I mean, do you have children?
I have 4.
Well, I doubt if they're all exactly the same.
They're not.
If you got 4 kids. So all you do is try to teach your children the values you believe in, and after a certain point in time, they have to decide for themselves, including the fundamentals of hard work, integrity, ambition. You can't teach a kid ambition, and you can't teach them. They can observe your ambition or your work ethic, but everybody has to decide for themselves, including your kids.
I've read that you give away 1/10 of your wealth in charity. Is that fair?
Well, we don't talk about what we give away.
Well, I guess that's my question. That for you, charity really is I mean, there are wings and hospitals named after you. There are some pretty high-profile donations you've made, but in general, your charity is a very personal thing, isn't it?
Well, historically we have any money we give away, we don't do it with a lot of noise. From time to time, people ask us to sponsor certain things because it helps other people give money to help a cause. So we will do that. But we are not in the business of giving money to give credit. We give money away to what we believe in. And I have always believed in tithing, if that's what you're talking about, going back to how I was raised. And so we've always continued to do that.
But why? I mean, there are a lot of people who I think for all the right reasons give money. Bill Gates, I think, is a good example, where he's given away a lot of his wealth and he's done a lot of really good work. I've interviewed Bill Gates, and he's very public about what he's done, but he also wants his name attached to it. He wants to take credit. He's done the work. Why not take the credit for it? You've taken a different approach, and I'm curious why that is.
Well, everybody's different. We just prefer to, other than certain places where they ask us to publicly give money because it will help their cause, we prefer to do it without a lot of noise.
You're 80, and you still come in here, you still run the shop. What drives you?
Well, I like going to work. I haven't found anything I like better than going to work. So I go to work, and I like what I do. I like what happens when I get here. You know, we travel a lot in our job, and my job, and we have we got a lot of mouths to feed, so we're busy.
You have amazing name recognition, certainly in Canada, and I think.
Well, just at home with my wife and dog at the minute.
What is the legacy you want to leave behind? What do you want people to remember Jim Pattison for?
I haven't even thought about that.
You clearly just think about the next day.
My job is doing what I do the best I can, and what happens, happens. Somebody else will have to figure all that out.
Well, as you say, you're 80 years old. Are you going to retire at some point?
I hope not, but it hasn't crossed my mind up to now. Why? You know, I'm having a good time. I got no shareholders and that I have to report to every 3 months, so it works out from our point of view, and so far the company's continuing to grow and prosper, and thank the Lord my health has been good, so I'm grateful for that.
Great. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
As this is the last episode ever of The Standard, I'll have our final goodbye next. After over 800 episodes, tonight's program will be the final one in The Standard's history. As the senior producer and one of the co-creators of this show, I can say we've had an incredible run. The staff here worked exceptionally hard finding fascinating guests and producing the show day in and day out. The on-air talent has been second to none, from Peter Klein, Randall Mark, and Andrew Dawson to Shannon Nelson and Mark Schneider. Each brought their own unique style that I believe made this program as popular as it's been the last 5 years. Unfortunately, things change. Joy TV 10, the station that produces The Standard, has been sold, and financial considerations mean local production cannot continue. I want to thank you, our viewers, for faithfully tuning us in each and every day. It's been a privilege to serve you. Now, for everyone at The Standard, I'm Jonathan Roth. Thanks for watching. Good night.